The WWH show. This is a show that asks a series of why, what, and how questions on topics that have national, regional, and global significance and implications. Today we have such a topic to talk about. It is a national issue. It is about race. In this studio, I have the privilege to talk to about this issue, which is why race issue still divides America. Larry Matthews. He is an author and also he used to be a journalist. Larry, thank you very much for coming.
Oh, I'm very glad to be here.
I'm glad that we're going to talk about that, but I have a disclaimer. When we chatted, I remember a couple of days, I told you that I'm not well equipped to this discussion, partly because I don't fully understand the race issue, and also I can't represent all black communities around the world because of my experience, my exposures, and so on. But I trust your experience because you told me that you used to involve in the civil rights movement and you understand what's going on, and also you care about this issue. So I trust your experience and your involvement to share with us about what's going on and how this race issue should be handled.
Well, I'm glad that you, and I'm flattered that you said that I fully understand this issue. I would have to put a caveat on there that I understand the race issue in America primarily from my own point of view and my own experience, but I wouldn't claim to understand, everything that's happening.
Yeah.
And it's striking that the race issue has resurfaced in a very public way in this country recently with Ferguson, Missouri, a police department issue and the shooting there, and this absolutely stupid and boneheaded fraternity song out of the University of Oklahoma, the incidents in New York and things like that. I think it just brings home that even though with the election of Barack Obama, many Americans were saying, well, we're living in a post-racial America. In fact, to a great degree we are from where we were decades ago, but we still have a long way to go. I think that given the racial history in this country, it might have been a little unrealistic to think that we could just wipe out all vestiges of, the race issue in a generation or two.
It's very interesting. I want to also point out about Ethiopians' view about race. I can divide Ethiopians into two. Some of them are like myself, first-generation Ethiopians who came to the United States once they are grown up. So we don't have the full picture, or we don't understand the complexity of race relation in the United States. And there are other Ethiopians, second-generation Ethiopians who grown up here. So when we talk about race issues, they think that we don't get it, and they tell us some experiences they have passed through, and they have some kinds of, resentments, frustrations, and they feel that they have been impacted by the race relation in the United States.
Are you talking about the second generation
Ethiopians? The second generation who
Yes.
were born in the United States.
Right.
Because they have been with white people, white students starting from childhood. For us, we came from the Ethiopia, for example. I didn't have much exposure when I was in the elementary school, high school, in college. I don't have. The only time I had exposure with white people was when I was working for an international organization. I was a research assistant. I had a Sudanese scientist who graduated from Purdue University. He was my boss, very dynamic, very great scientist, and we were a great team.
Right.
And after that, I had a French scientist as a boss, and then a Canadian. These are white researchers, scientists.
Sure.
We were a great team. We feel like we are brothers. I didn't have any issue, race issue. We were like brothers. We work together. We eat together. We socialize. We drive to the field. I don't have any bad impression about, race as I grow up in Ethiopia.
Right.
But for those Ethiopians, second generation Ethiopians, they tell me a different story. Now that's why I wanted this, discussion, because it looks like for some Ethiopians this issue is not relevant for them. They don't see why we should discuss about race. We don't see any race issue. But for some Ethiopians who grown up here, they could be able to tell us that, oh, there are race issues, so you're naive, or you don't open your eyes, you don't see, but it exists. So I think that's why I say that I'm not well equipped to talk about race issue. And some of my Ethiopian friends, maybe other black friends, they may not really feel like I'm representing them because of my stories. But race issue, I found out, is also important to the second generation Ethiopians.
Yeah, they would have a different perspective on it.
Exactly.
The race issue here it goes back hundreds of years, and I think it's important to understand that in the 1700s and into the 1800s, early 1800s, the black people were not the only people who were enslaved. There were some white people who were enslaved as well.
I didn't know that.
It is said that in the 1700s, a black slave cost much more than an Irishman, and they were also enslaved. But what is different is that as the Irish generations came, they were, you couldn't tell them from anybody else because they were white.
Yeah.
And so generations later, they kind of have blended in, although they certainly had their struggles in New York and Boston, and but they've managed to come out. The Italians had the same issues when they came. But now here we are in the 21st century after the civil rights movement. But what's happened is now we've had a long period, especially the post-Civil War period, when in the South there were the Jim Crow laws, that there were laws that segregated blacks and whites. Blacks were treated very badly. The Great Migration North, we had all those things that happened. And that created a kind of racial reality that we're still shaking off. When I was a young man, this was a very different country. Those laws were still in place. This was during the Civil Rights Movement. And people of my generation, white and black and Hispanics and all, were the ones who went into the South, and they marched, and there were the riots that we had in 60s.
So did you
protests.
participate in that demonstration?
I did not. I was a journalist then. In the early 60s, I was in the
reporting.
Army, and then in the late 60s, I was a journalist. But I don't think there's any doubt where our sympathies were. When you see people being beaten by the police or run down by horses and things like that, it affects how you feel about the issue, even if you're a journalist and you're supposed to be balanced. So from that perspective, it's a very different country. And I don't think there's any way to understate the importance of the election of Barack Obama as president. I think that says a lot about America, that we could get past this issue and elect this man simply because he's brilliant, he was a charismatic leader, and we liked his ideas. And the fact that he was black became secondary. Nobody really cared about that.
Yeah.
And I think that after the election, the country kind of congratulated itself. Look how far we've come.
Yeah, a big success around the world.
Yes, but that was at the top. That's the very top of our society. But when you get down into individual neighborhoods and communities, some things have not changed that much. Witness Ferguson, Missouri, in the report from the Justice Department about the inherent racism, the institutional racism that's built into that community. It's a majority black community. The people who run it are white. The police are white, and they exploit the black people there. It's just a terrible situation, and we see what's happened there. But then we look at a community like New York, the largest city in the country, and they have the same kind of issues there. So what that tells me is that there are still pockets of racism. I wouldn't go so far as to say the country is racist as a whole, but I think that there are certain pockets of racism, and it kind of comes up now and then in these types of incidents.
By the way, I can tell you that, I have some friends who came from some European countries, and I don't mean that that's the standard, but they tell me that the race issue in Europe is worse than America, because some of them, they tell me that as black people, there are very few of them, because in the United States you have millions of black people.
Right.
Some of them immigrated from Africa, some of them born here in the United States. But in some European countries, you feel it that you are black. You feel it that you are undermined or considered as alien. Mm-hmm. But come to America, in certain areas, as you said, there may be that kind of feelings where right. you are a minority. But come to Maryland, for example, where I live, you see black people around the world, everywhere, and I feel like I'm at home.
Right.
So compared to other countries, I think in the United States, racism is not that bad compared to other places. So I agree that America is not a racist country, because Americans could be able to elect a black president. And I met, the first person who gave me a ride from a bus station to my university when I came in 2005 was a white professor. Mm-hmm. And after that, I had great colleagues, friends. In the organization I worked as a software engineer, the top manager was my close friend. He treated me like his little brother. We still communicate. And I have board of directors, board of advisors in my organizations who are white. I have mentors who are white, friends. Whenever I need something, I call them. Some of them, they may even seek my advices, my opinions on certain professional issues. So for me, it's not fair to say that American whites are racist, because there are many American whites I met, they're not racist. But we should not say that, okay, this is everywhere. As you said, in certain areas there may be some whites, minorities, right. who may undermine or discriminate black people.
Right. I think if you were to look at the public opinion polls, the great majority of Americans believe that everyone should be treated equally and everyone should have the same opportunity. But as we know, a small group of people can have kind of an enlarged impact on any given issue if they're just loud about it. Yeah. A good friend of mine who is very involved in the race issue in this country, who's my age, has been involved in it for 50 years. His theory is that racism is more of a based on class. That, say, for yourself, you're an educated man, you deal with other educated people. So they would have a different outlook on life than, say, someone of a working class. The racism may be more prominent among the working class than the middle class or the educated class, professional class like yourself. I don't know if that's true, pardon me, but it sounds like it's certainly plausible. There are some statistics, though, that are very troubling. As I mentioned to you in one of our conversations, it is said, that 1 in 3 young black men will go to jail. 1 in 3. That's very troubling. The African Americans and black people constitute a little over 13% of the U.S. population, but they're 40% of the prison population. And in some prisons, many prisons, they're the majority of people there are black. Now, a racist would look at that and say, well, that must mean that black people are a criminal class. That's not the situation at all. There have been many, many studies that show that the nation's judicial system is stacked against minorities. There was a recent report that came out. There's been some controversy recently because the District of Columbia has legalized marijuana, and Congress doesn't want it legalized and all. But what people really didn't realize is that prior to that, marijuana had been decriminalized, meaning you wouldn't go to jail for it anymore, which many people have done in the past, and there are, the great majority of people of color in prison are there on drug charges. But there was a $100 ticket. You get a ticket. If a cop caught you with a joint, they give you a $100 ticket. So they did a study on where are these tickets out. The 7th Police District is over in southeast Washington. It's a low-income area, predominantly black. 95% of the tickets for marijuana in the district were given in the 7th district, which is mostly black. Only a handful of tickets were given in the white neighborhoods in far northwest Washington, west of Rock Creek Park, which is a very affluent area. Now, a simple explanation would be that white kids don't smoke weed, but black kids do. But we all know that's not the case. Studies have shown that there's about equal drug use between blacks and whites. So there's right there, that's evidence of institutional racism, in my opinion. Because the police are over there in 7D, in the 7th district, seeing these black kids toking up, and they give them a ticket. Now, you know that over in Northwest D.C., the kids are also smoking weed, and maybe their parents, but they're not giving out tickets. And there was something that came out from a former DEA agent, Drug Enforcement Administration agent, who said that they were instructed not to arrest people in white neighborhoods. So what does that tell you? If you take a kid who, say, is a black kid over in Anacostia, and he gets busted for marijuana, and then maybe if he gets busted several times, it goes up. Then it can become a crime. So he is on a path to a bad future, simply because of the police emphasizing black kids with weed. It starts out small and it grows. That's just one example. There's the other thing that I think is very important to understand is how do we get to a point where the judicial system in this country could be stacked against certain groups of people? And it's all about politics. Another statistic, 90% of political donations of $200 or more, 90% of political donations of $200 or more come from white neighborhoods. 90% of elected officials in America are white. However, the people of color represent, that would be non-white Hispanics as well, people of color represent 37%, nearly 40% of the population, but only 10% of the elected officials. And it's the elected officials who are passing the laws. And I personally don't believe, and I know there are others who disagree with me, that they are consciously stacking the deck against people of color. But I think what they are doing is passing laws that appeal to their own lifestyle and their own
constituency, to their own supporters and donors.
And their own prejudices, which they may not recognize. So it's like, this is the world according to me, so I will do what I can to further this world. Because this is what I think, this is what everybody around me thinks, therefore it must be the way it is.
Well, it's very interesting. Last time I had a discussion with Veronica Adams, who's also white. She was talking about why women are not at the front and leading, even in America. I mean, it's an advanced community where women are embraced compared to other communities.
Right.
Like, for example, in Ethiopia, women are not actually getting any favors or advantage to become leaders. But she was talking about, at that time, she mentioned about this race issue. Mm-hmm. And she said women are now, not because they are less in numbers, but because of, they are not in decision-making positions,
right.
They're minorities. And she was telling me about this unconscious privilege. She said, for example, a man can walk through, to a room full of people, women, men. He may not have any feeling that he may be discriminated or undermined or disrespected. Think about a woman maybe walking into a room full of men. She may have that unconscious kind of or internal oppression where she may feel like I may be disrespected, discriminated. It's unconscious. It's internal oppression. But for the male, when they walk through that kind of room, for example, full of women, they have this unconscious privilege to feel like that I will be respected, I will be appreciated, or I will be embraced. The same way in race issues, maybe someone who is colored, when he walks, let's say, or she walks into a room full of white people, there may be internal oppression where that person may feel that I may be discriminated, disrespected, or not embraced, and so on. But in the same room, for example, a white man walks through in that kind of room, maybe full of black people, she may have that unconscious privilege to think that I will be respected, embraced, and that there is no internal oppression feelings. I think the lawmakers may have that kind of unconscious privilege where they may not really consider some of the disadvantage of those laws, those rules and regulations that may affect colored people compared to because of that unconscious side of them. So maybe, as you're right, they're unconscious, but whatever laws they come up with, it may favor their constituencies. It may not favor colored people.
Right. I think the majority of white people in this country, in my opinion, are not consciously racist. I don't think they have any ill will toward people of color. My personal belief is they just don't think about people of color. They think about their own lives like everybody else. So they watch television and they read the paper that something's happening in Ferguson, Missouri, or this has happened, and they think to themselves, well, that's awful. But they don't see that they have participated in that. And I think that that's one of the things that I think one of the upsides of the current news coverage of the race issue in the country is that it forces us to think about it. It forces us to think about communities where, in Ferguson, Missouri, the black people are being mistreated. We all are aware, I believe, that there are communities in this country where Hispanics are not treated well. Or others, immigrants and people like that. And I think that people of goodwill need to kind of address this issue.
Yeah.
It's not I don't know that everybody's going to take to the streets like they did in the 60s, but I think it's certainly something to think about when we think about for whom we're going to vote, our own inner prejudices, the ones that we've grown up with, things like that, I think that it can help improve it. Because, you and I live in an area that is nothing like some of the more racist parts of this country. Yeah. It's like you were talking about your community and my community, my neighborhood. We have white people, we have black people, we have Asian people, we have people from Pakistan and India and China, and they're just all mixed in, and it's not an issue. Everybody's, we're all neighbors. We all live in the same kind of houses.
Yeah. You meet in associations, meetings.
Sure, that's right.
You hang out together, you socialize, so it's not an issue. By the way, race issue, maybe I'm wrong. I think, for example, sometimes even within our country, now if you go to Ethiopia right now, if you are from the wrong side of the fence, if you are from some ethnic groups that are now favored by the current regime, you may be treated as a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
There is discrimination. Yeah. For example, if you are in the wrong side of the fence and if you become extremely successful, they shoot you down. Because Hitler was promoting the Aryan race. He was saying this is a supreme race.
Yes.
Like that, in our country, for example, they are advocating, systematically working on to create, a supreme ethnic group in Ethiopia. So if you are from a different ethnic group in Ethiopia, the same religion, the same history, black, but you're discriminated based on your ethnic. For me, for example, I am in another country, let's say in the United States. Somebody discriminated me. I may not take it seriously because one of the reasons, we're different.
Yeah.
Okay, we're different. This person is white, I'm black, we have different culture, maybe we have different taboos, different expectations. Maybe he never exposed to my kind of person, or maybe he has a bad experience with another black person, so when he sees another black person like me, he may have that stereotyping. I understand that kind of situations. Go back in your own country. You are a person born in that country. The person who is discriminating you is the same guy, he's black, he's from the same religion with you, you've grown up the same culture, and now you are discriminated. Yeah. It's very painful. And also, sure. I don't want people to think that race is between white and black. I have many friends. Once I was working in an Indian company, and I didn't observe it maybe, but a friend came up to me. He is from Africa. He talked to me, Assegid, he calls me AZ. Have you noticed these Indians are discriminating us? I asked him, why you say that? He told me that, look, whenever there is a job, good job, long-term job, they give those jobs to the Indians. And whenever there is a short-term job, bad job, or whatever, they give to the African immigrants. So he saw that discrimination between Asians and Africans. I have another incident where my friend was working with a Chinese colleague, and this Chinese colleague, whenever he greet to Americans, he greet them with respect, and so on and so forth. When he talked to Asian friends, he's elated and happy and so on. He told me whenever he talked to me, he even didn't look into my eyes. All the non-verbal cues tell me that he disrespects me, he discriminates me. Yeah. Worst, recently someone told me that someone from one of the Arabic countries, he was disrespecting this Ethiopian friend, and I asked him why he disrespects you. Because many of the Arab friends I know, they complain that we are discriminated because we are Arabs and so on. Why then the same people who are complaining about being discriminated, why they discriminate an Ethiopian? So he told me that because many Ethiopians, because of the government in Ethiopia, because there is no job, people are migrating to the Middle East, like maids, to work some blue-collar jobs. Because of that, he formed this opinion that Ethiopians kind of inferior than Arabs. So he was showing off as if he is better than. So we should not really consider racism or this discrimination only between blacks and whites. It's also possible that between ethnic groups there may be this discrimination, and between different clans there may be this discrimination. Some of the clans thinking that we are superior than the other clans and so on. So I think this is, as you say, this is stupid, this is nonsense, especially in the 21st century. Right. The DNA, the human DNA, you don't see much difference between white and black, between Asians and Africans, or between Arab and Africans. Our difference is our upbringing, our culture. Right. And that should not lead me to undermine someone based on race or ethnicity or clan.
Right. And that's something I think that we as humans have to overcome, because we have a long history of that. I mean, look at the Balkans. Look at Europe. I mean, Europe, the Germans, they've had for generations, they've had bad opinions about the Italians, and they don't like the Greeks, and all that kind of thing is part of the human experience. But there's so much that's lost in that. And what you were talking about in Ethiopia, if you have one clan discriminating against another clan, not only are they marginalizing the people in that clan, but they are losing whatever contribution those people could make. Yeah. And that happens everywhere. Exactly. And I think that in this country, since the civil rights movement, we have seen this tremendous contribution that the African Americans, or the black people in this country, could make to the country. I mean, look at the President of the United States, members of Congress, captains of industry, and people like that. Now, there's certainly, in business, a lot more progress could be made. But, black people who have led large corporations have done very well. So what we've seen is that if we open the doors to everyone and make it a true meritocracy, If you're smart enough, you can go to Harvard. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white or Asian or Indian or whatever you are. You can go there, and then based on your education and your intelligence and your drive, you can contribute to this country and do great things.
Exactly.
As we've shown that. So there's a drain right there on society. It pulls society down. It interferes with our productivity. It certainly interferes with the quality of life we have here. I mean, let's face it, the people at the top have a nice quality of life, but we need to open the doors for everyone. Yeah. Because the great American dream, which has been realized by many, many people, is that you can go from the bottom to the top.
This is the only country, because I have some research, I have done some research. Also, I talked to people that you can be an immigrant, for example, in the United States within 10 years. If you work hard, if you are intelligent enough, if you have good character, you could succeed and become a millionaire, which is impossible in other countries. The regulations, the laws, the discriminations, if you are an immigrant, it's unlikely that you can become, as you say, from bottom up in other countries. But in these countries, many immigrants that I know succeeded and achieved that millionaireship. Sure. Because they work hard, because they are ethical, they are intelligent, they work hard, they are disciplined. So this is, that's why we need to talk, for example. Before that, I would like to make also, I have many African American friends, intelligent, sharp. They work with me and we are friends. Some of them are my mentors. And I see every day, the kind of contribution they make to their communities. Think about opening up, as you said, to many of African Americans, many of the colored immigrants opportunities. The benefits is win-win to America, of course, white and other colored people, because as you said, when you jail the majority of your people, young people, because of some silly mistakes, you're losing their potential.
That's exactly right.
When you discriminate people and undermine them because of their race, ethnicity, and so on, you're losing. In my country, I can tell you, I want to go back home and help my country. But what kept me here is because if I go there, I will be treated as a second citizen. Mm-hmm. Many Ethiopians, went there back to help their country. They had projects, they proposed, but they were, treated second class. Their projects were snatched and given to certain people who are favored by the ruling party, and they came back bankrupt. You see how the country is losing its people, its potential, because the country cannot go anywhere because of its infrastructure, because of its technology, or because of its few minority political elites. Impossible. If you discriminate, if you undermine and treat badly 90% of, because the ruling party is a minority group of people who only favoring one ethnic group and undermining the rest of more than 90% of the population are treated as maybe servants to that elite group, or they are treated second citizen, unless a few of Ethiopians who are supporting the party because they benefit here and there and so on and so forth. So the country is losing more than 90% of its potential. She cannot go anywhere without creating that atmosphere where people should feel like this is my country. If you don't own your country, if you don't feel like you are part of that community, you can't contribute your best.
Right.
You may even resent. So the same in America. If you don't feel like you're part of this country, unless you feel like you're a first-class citizen, you don't give your best. If you don't give your best, who's losing? Of course, you're losing. At the same time, the country is losing.
Absolutely.
Her future is losing. Her standing in the world is compromised.
I think that's a very important point that you've made there. If you don't have a stake in the system, then you don't care about the system.
You may try to sabotage it.
What do you care?
Yeah,
and that's been, one of the great criticisms, especially back in the civil rights area, that the white racists were using is, well, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, they don't have enough, so they're not contributing. Well, of course they're not contributing. Why should they? They have no stake in it. If you don't have a stake in the outcome, then if you invest $1 and you know that dollar is gone and you're never getting it back, you're not going to put your dollar on the table.
Exactly.
But if you put your dollar on the table and say that dollar might turn into $10, then you're going to think, all right, I'm in the game.
Exactly.
And if you're not in the game, then you don't care.
Exactly.
And I think that part of the problem that we have, and especially in some of the low-income communities in this country, whether they're black or Hispanic or white, is that they don't feel they have a stake in the game. They don't feel that there's anything in it for them. You know, why should I bother? And I mean, there are neighborhoods in Baltimore that are all white and very, very poor. And you drive there and you see the same look on the faces you'd see in any poor neighborhood. People sitting on the stoop, smoking cigarettes, maybe drinking a little something out of a paper bag, but they don't feel like they have, you know, any future. And that's the key, I think, for low-income people, whatever race they are, whatever color they are, whatever religion they are, is they have to feel they can bring themselves up. And I think that the immigrant communities in this country are actually an example to the rest of us. Because if you look at the immigrant communities in this country, no matter where they are, the first people get here, they have nothing. They work hard. Their families involved. You know, they're very family-oriented, most of them. Second generation, they go to college. Everybody sacrifices to get that next generation to college. Third generation are doctors or lawyers. They're prosperous. They've lived the American dream.
Yeah.
But they have to be given a chance to do that.
Yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. We have talked about the background, you know, what's going on and so on, but let's talk about what has been improved since the civil rights movement in the 60s. I know that you know very well that the first president who took this race issue seriously was John F. Kennedy. He considered it as a moral issue. Even if he was assassinated before the bill was approved by Congress, his successor, Lyndon Johnson, he was the one working hard and making sure that the bill is approved. And I like what he said. After 5 days since John F. Kennedy died, he said that no memorial oration or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill, for which he fought so long.
Right.
Since then, what kind of good things happened in the United States that favored colored people?
Well, there were two bills, the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Act, that were key to changing this entire country. And ironically, historians will tell you that had John F. Kennedy lived, he couldn't have had that bill passed. He hadn't been in the Senate that long, but Lyndon Johnson had been in Congress for a long time, and he was a Texan, had as a young man some racial prejudices that he had to overcome. He knew how to make things happen, and he knew how to strong-arm people in Congress. He could get legislation passed, and he did. And I think that in terms of domestic policy, Lyndon Johnson is second only to Franklin Delano Roosevelt in importance in this country, going all the way back to the founding of the Republic. Of the two bills, probably the Voting Rights Act has had the most dramatic impact on this country. Because prior to that, especially in the South, it was very difficult for black people to vote. They had a poll tax. They would ask questions that no one could answer. You know, how many, you know, what was the population of the United States in 1790? You know, things like that. Nobody knows the answer to that, and so these people couldn't vote. And so you had majority black communities that were run by white racists, sheriffs, and, you know, those kinds of things. Voting Rights Act completely changed that. Suddenly, majority black communities, even in the Deep South, had black elected officials. Things changed. Then the anti-discrimination laws in the Civil Rights Act made it illegal to discriminate in public places. You know, people sometimes forget, especially younger people, that even in the 60s, certainly in the 50s, black entertainers who were very popular, nationally popular, couldn't stay in hotels in the South. they had to find other black people who would let them stay with them. People like Nat King Cole, people who are just internationally famous because of those laws that they had there. The Civil Rights Act wiped those laws off the books. The Voting Rights Act gave black people the power to vote. And in a democracy, the power to vote is everything. The tragedy, of course, is that many people choose not to use that. They choose not to exercise that right, which is terrible, because it's like saying, I don't count. But it changed everything. So over a long period of time, in the late 60s, there was a lot of violence, racial violence in this country. Much of it related to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I was in Washington then, and I was in the riots in this city. And to look out over Washington, D.C., the capital of the free world, and see it in flames was just a very dramatic and tragic moment. To see Army machine guns set up on the steps of the United States Capitol, it was just terrible. It was a terrible moment. And it happened in cities all across the country. And there were some very militant black groups that engaged in violence. In all fairness, there were some very militant white groups who were anti-war. They also engaged in violence. They blew things up and they killed people. And so we came out of that in the 70s, a very different country. I think the old line racists in the South had been repudiated. Many of them just kind of went underground. They didn't have the influence they had prior to the Voting Rights Act. It's very different when the sheriff is black, or when the mayor is black. So that's changed the country, and opportunities opened up. Maybe as a country we kind of lost the momentum for that, because there was a great deal of enthusiasm and energy behind social justice. And then maybe in the 80s we became a little complacent, and now everybody thinks all our problems are solved. Our president's black, what's the problem?
So this may be the main reason why we're not advancing further, because so many things changed since the Civil Rights Movement bill, the Civil Rights Bill, but it looks like it is now stagnated, even resurfaced.
Yes.
So what are those issues you think causing that?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge as a nation that we are not a post-racial society, not the one we thought we had, despite the fact that we have a black president and all those advances. I have a cousin, I have a split family. My mother was a French Canadian from New England. My father was from the Deep South. He was born in northern Alabama in deep poverty and all of it. He was a career soldier. So I have family in the Deep South, and I have family in New England. I talked to a cousin of mine who is an educated man. He's an anesthesiologist and worked at the University of Tennessee Hospital there. And he is, although he would deny it, he still is a pretty racist guy. But the change in the South is this. His boss is a black woman, which he acknowledges. But he still has feelings about black people that are left over from previous generations, even though his paycheck is signed by a black woman. And he's smart enough to understand that he'd better keep his opinions to himself.
Yeah, he'll be in trouble.
Or he's gone.
Yeah.
So there's a big change there. Now, is he ever going to change? Absolutely not. But one would hope that his children and his grandchildren would begin to shed some of these things. And I think that in those communities like that, there's this residual racism that people talk about, and that's what just one of the things I think we have to do is I think with all the stuff that's happening now, at least we're addressing it. You know, people are asking themselves, gee, could that happen here?
So now we understand that this is not good for America. It's not good for certain people in certain ways. It's bad for everybody because humanity will reach this level of advancement, civilization. The next thing should have been facing the common challenges. America faces common challenges for both white and colored people.
Right.
Think about terrorism. This is a big threat.
Right.
Black is not a threat, white is not a threat for me. Right now the threat for both races is, for example, terrorism, poverty, disease, environmental degradation, that threaten the next generation, not only this generation, the next generation. So why should just ignore the race issue? I mean, solve it and move on and face the real threats.
Well, what you're addressing in this country right now, I think, is the collapse of our political system. It's become dysfunctional. Everybody agrees that our infrastructure is falling apart. Bridges are falling down. The electric grid needs to be updated. We have, for an advanced country, we have one of the world's slowest internet systems. Everybody agrees that something should be done. Nothing is done. And though when we talk about these other issues, we're in the same spot with those issues. Look at this letter that these Republicans in Congress sent to Iran, right in the middle of negotiations with them. It's unheard of. Who would think of that? Who would think that was a good idea? Nobody in their right mind would think that was a good idea. The Social Security issue here has been burbling politically for decades. I remember as a young reporter going up covering Congress, and they were talking about it then. We've got to do something. We've got to get Social Security on track. You know, it's headed for disaster. Nothing was done. And it's issue after issue with that. It's this complacency mixed with dysfunction that kind of has us all just sitting around watching our bridges fall down. And look at I'm going to speak politically probably, and maybe you could, tell me I'm out of line here, but look at the disaster we've made out of the Middle East. You know, the invasion of Iraq. We had no business doing that.
With false information.
And, well, that and look at we had obviously Saddam Hussein was not the world's nicest guy. There are a lot of Saddam Husseins in the world. We can't, we selected one guy, so we're going after him, but what about all the others? Are these people thinking we should now go after North Korea and maybe Kazakhstan or, Sudan? I mean, where is it going to end? Yep. We don't have a business doing that.
Yep. There are many tyrants.
There are many tyrants.
Killing people in thousands.
That's right.
Genocide and so on.
You look at how many people were oppressed and died under Saddam Hussein. How many people have died as a result of our invasion of Iraq? Countries disintegrating. The Islamic Republic, or whatever they call themselves, the Islamic State, has made just a mockery of civilization. Syria's fallen apart. Nobody can do anything about that. The whole region is just in a historic state of change. Probably the biggest change in 100 years since the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. And we are largely responsible for at least a part of that. And that's just one clumsy thing we've done. If you were an ally of the United States, certainly if you were a friendly government in the Middle East, you'd be looking at us and going, who wants to get too close to these guys? Yeah. You can't believe a word they say. Yeah. And I think that that's just part of the political dysfunction here. this foreign policy, if it's dysfunctional, affects how we're seen in the world. Domestic policy, if it's dysfunctional, affects the country as a whole and our quality of life. So getting back to what we were talking about earlier about the people, the human resources we have. It's kind of like the Henry Ford philosophy. He wanted to pay his workers enough money so that they could buy the cars they made. That's
smart.
Yeah. As a country, we need to think like that.
Yes.
We have, the unemployment is going down, but pay's not. I mean, you may be employed, but if you're making minimum wage or $10 an hour or $12 an hour, you're not going to be able to support your family. And you're not going to be able to go even to Walmart, to buy things, much less to buy, a nice car, nice house, nice furniture, things like that. Those are the things that we need to work on. The period post-war until really maybe into the 70s was a very prosperous period for this country. And it's interesting that it was probably the most prosperous period we've ever had as a nation, and the gap between rich and poor was as narrow as it's ever been. The people at the top were not making 2,000 times what the people on the bottom were making. The multiples were much smaller, but the country as a whole was much better off in terms of the economy and quality of life. Now, many of those jobs were in manufacturing and they're gone now, but they've been replaced by other jobs. There was a study that came out in the old Rust Belt area, Michigan, Ohio, places like that, that the common myth is that manufacturing is gone and won't come back. Well, in fact, old manufacturing is gone, but there's new manufacturing that requires different skills. It's computer-generated stuff. And the people, they can't fill these jobs. This was really very startling to me. These jobs pay $60,000 a year. It takes 2 years to learn how to operate this computer-generated machinery that makes things. They don't have enough people to do that. And in most communities, there's no training program. So what does that tell us? Where are we putting our money?
I think, you brought a very important point that I 100% support, because some of the policies that the lawmakers are making, they may be effective for short term, but for the long term, they're not effective. As you say, they even create a system, a society that crumble. That's why many of the systems are now falling apart.
That's right.
Many of the infrastructures are falling because they're not far-sighted. The policies, the laws, and so on, they're not far-sighted. The way even treating the issue in the Middle East is using force. Yes, force to contend, not really solve the problem in the Middle East.
That's right.
It should have been a long-term, empowering the people in the society, because if the people are poor, disintegrated, they don't have any hope. So they don't fight evil in their own countries, like the Islamic State, whatever, because they don't have any hope. But if you help them get empowered, have jobs, family, and so on, they are the one seeing the threat and fighting it, because
right.
America cannot fight all the time in the Middle East to fight terrorists. It's impossible.
That's right.
I have the same feeling in Ethiopia. If you raise lots of middle class people, if you invest on the people to become smart rather than discriminating them based on ethnicity, the more successful people you have, the more stable political system you're going to have.
Exactly.
The more stability, the more prosperity you're going to have. But somehow politicians, they are not far-sighted. They're always looking for something to appease the population, just to get some votes and so on. That's why in the American system, you see great systems, of course, some community organizations, institutions, but some of the institutions need to make shift to be long, far-sighted, right, so that they invest on the people. The more people you have, the more they purchase. The purchasing power is going to be great. So even the rich people are going to benefit out of that, because if you have poor people, helpless people, they don't purchase your
That's
products
right.
and your services. So it's a very bad lose-lose kind of game,
right,
rather than making it win-win.
Look at it, previous generations. In the 1930s and 40s, they had enough foresight for future generations, for us, to create an electric grid around the country, to put in hydroelectric dams so they could provide power to people, to Tennessee Valley Authority so they could put power to the south. Eisenhower had enough foresight to build the interstate highway system. He knew that it would never be completed in his lifetime. Those people who voted for that knew that. But they did it for us. What are we doing for
the next generations?
For the next generations, for the people who will be here 50 years from now? What are we doing for them?
I mean, that's very important for the country, because the country
absolutely
cannot remain her position in the world unless she invests in the future generation. I think 2 weeks ago, I had a discussion with a very dynamic young Ethiopian lady. We were talking about how it is important to invest on the next generation, because Ethiopia's problem cannot be fixed by the current generation. We should have next generation people mentored by the contemporary generation. Otherwise, We're going to have a very disastrous future. The same in America. So the leaders, the politicians, should be far-sighted when they, handle issues, whether it is race issue, whether it is economic issue, whether it's political issue, whether it's a foreign policy. It should be far-sighted, considering the future generation.
Exactly. Who do you hear today saying, we need to do this so our future generations will be better off? It's placing a long bet. Technological advances we've made in this country have been because of the availability of the electricity that was provided by people who were thinking about us in the 1930s and 40s, and the people who built the universities and the labs and those kinds of things. Forward-thinking people. We have a lack of forward-thinking people today. Who in Congress? I mean, what a bunch of bozos, in my opinion. 535 dysfunctional people who act like kindergartners. They go to work every day and throw food at each other. That's not what they're there to do. What are they thinking about? I mean, when they get to a point where they can't fix today's problems, they're not in a position to think about tomorrow. They drive to work over bridges that are literally falling down, and they're not doing anything about it. It's very sad. There's a New York Times columnist named David Brooks who does a lot of thinking. He's a kind of a thinker guy, and he's pointed out that we've been in this spot before, and we always come out of it, because at some point people become disgusted.
Yeah.
They say, that's it.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. I would like to think that point will come sooner rather than later, but nobody knows when that's going to happen.
Bringing, far-sighted leaders who think about the future of this country, the future of the next generation, far-sighted politicians and decision makers and policy makers who have this, holistic thinking, rather than just appeasing voters, rather than fixing problems and extinguishing fires here and there. They should have this long view of seeing the world in a different view, by considering the next generation, by considering the future of this country, her standing in the world as a superpower.
That's right. The only people, or at least the most prominent people who are in that position now, are the people in the tech field. I mean, they're very forward-looking people. They've just created this new world and are always thinking about other worlds. Unfortunately, our politicians are way behind. They're not even on.
Coming to race issues, let's talk about, within the coming 5 minutes, what should be done? I mean, how can we at least mitigate the re-emerged race issue in America? What should be the role of institutions and so on and so forth?
Well, the very first thing that I think should be done is that each one of us must ask ourselves, how am I contributing to the racial problems in this country? And I think that's step number one. Step number two is to engage in conversations like this. You're a black man, I'm a white man, we're having a discussion about race. That doesn't happen very often. It's not something that people are comfortable with. but I think it needs to happen. Because having a bunch of white people sitting around talking about the race issue or a bunch of black people sitting around talking about the race issue is not going to actually create any solutions.
I would like to give you this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. He said that people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. So the race issue can be fixed if both black and white people talking about this, rather than being, scared about the other side, rather than feeling that the other person, or the other side is wrong. We should bring together ourselves and discuss and know each other, discuss the issue openly in public. Now, remember that some of the high officials, of course, Barack Obama has been making it public. Also recently, the former director of FBI, he admitted that there is race issue.
That's right.
In the law enforcement. So discussion is very important. People should come together and discuss, because there are many urgent issues out there that are threatening us and the future generation than race issue. I mean, we are advanced now. We reached the level where there is no evidence, scientific evidence that genetically we are different.
No.
We came from the same source.
That's
For example,
right.
Whenever I think this way. First, my source is God, who created me. God may be different for somebody else. For somebody else, maybe, Allah or whatever. But my source is God. So I have this thinking also. Inside of me, there is an inner man, which is also spirit. Its source is God. And that inner man or inner woman is one with the other people. It doesn't matter, this physical thing, I have this color, dark, black. I have this blood, flesh, bone. This is not me. Me inside my inner man. And that is one with your inner man. So we should not really allow this external thing, because this external, our body, our flesh, our eyes, and so on, they are helping us survive in this physical, harsh world. The spirit cannot survive, or our inner personality cannot survive. That's why we have this. We should not think that I am here. And also, we should not think that our egos, because our ego is the one that says, oh, I'm different than him. I try to age out my inner being or my source and try to think that, oh, this is me. And so I'm different than him. And try to create create issue and fight based on these external appearances. But we have to outgrow this and see that we are one. Maybe our upbringing, our culture and so on, that make us different. Not
right.
Really our genetics. It's not our source that's different.
Right.
So we should come closer, talk about the real issue, fix it together, and move on and give a better world to the next generation.
Yes, and God has given us the freedom to choose.
Exactly.
Unfortunately,
we can choose this rather than
many
fighting over something irrelevant in the 21st century.
Many times we make the wrong choice.
Exactly. So what kind of contributions do you think also institutions because they have power, for example, religious institutions, they have power to convince their congregations that race issue is not really helping us?
Well, many of the churches, the so-called mainstream churches, were very involved in the civil rights movement. The Catholic Church, the Presbyterians and Methodists and people like that, maybe not the Southern Baptists, but maybe they were. I don't want to be unfair to them. Maybe some of the other fringe churches were not, but I think the churches in general were on the front lines of the civil rights movement because they understand that. I mean, if you're a Christian, the basic message of Christianity is certainly not racism. It's, tolerance and love and things like that. As, we've been admonished, the two things that are most important are to love God and to love your fellow man.
Exactly. If you don't love a fellow man, which you can see, you can't really love which
the Creator.
You can't see. Yeah.
That's right.
You can't see him. The only thing you can show him love is by loving your brothers and sisters.
I think the institutions may not be the problem. Maybe the people who are individuals in these institutions After this incident at the University of Oklahoma, where this fraternity was singing these racist songs, it was actually kind of heartening to see that the president of the university was quick to act. He's a white guy, shuts down and expelled the fraternity, expelled 2 students, but more importantly, seemed to be genuinely sincere in his outrage that such a thing could happen on his campus. I think that's a very encouraging thing.
More people may take that kind of actions because we have to understand, of course, from the colored people's side, we should not really generalize, stereotype that all white people are racist or white people hate us. That's not true, because we have to think that very few people are maybe creating that situation here and there. I like what Mahatma Gandhi said. Mahatma Gandhi said that you must not lose faith in humanity. Humanity is an ocean. If a few drops of the ocean are dirty, the ocean doesn't become dirty.
Right.
So we have to have that feeling, whether we have white people, we should not lose faith in the whole black community, colored community. Maybe a few black people may be racist. I can tell you one example. Once I was, it was like 2 months since I came to the United States, and 2 black kids, it was like 15 meters away from me, or maybe 20 meters away from me. They were chasing with stones a kid. They are maybe 10 or 11 years old. Mm-hmm. They are chasing a white kid. And what was very fascinating, because I turned, because they were cursing him. I didn't hear what they were saying. They were cursing and chasing him. And when I turned it back, I saw that an adult black woman, she rescued that little white kid, and she chased the little black guys. Mm-hmm. And she embraced him, she treated him well, she held his hand, she took him, I think, where he wanted to go. So you can see here that 2 kids, I don't know why they were doing it, whether they know him, whether it's something to do with race or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I saw another black woman rescuing him, treating him very well, chasing them. So there are great black people out there. So if I am a white person, if I have some resentment, or if maybe I might have been treated badly, maybe I was discriminated by some black colleagues or whatever, I should not lose faith in the black community. There are great black people. The same way, I may be a black person. I may be discriminated. I may have some resentments, but I should have faith in the majority of the white community, and I should work with them. I should come closer and fix that problem, the problem that's created by my minorities. Mm-hmm. Very few people.
I think that white people in this country should understand, because I also know that there are black people who don't like white people. I think that white people should understand that there's a reason for that. And I think that, we don't need to allow ourselves to be abused or beat up or anything like that. But if somebody indicates to me, a black person indicates to me that they really would rather that I'm not around or, associate with their family and all that, I have to understand that there's a reason for that. I think as we discussed earlier, when an entire people are traumatized, that doesn't go away if you just say, okay, we've changed the laws. Black people as a race in this country were traumatized as a people for a long time. And during that period, they developed their own culture. They developed, in a way, maybe their own language, their own way of doing things. And I think we have to respect that. And just because the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act were passed doesn't mean that, okay, everything's fine. It's not going to be that way. Native Americans probably were traumatized more than any other people I've ever heard of in the world. I'm sure there have been other terrible instances, but by one estimate, only by one estimate, but when in the year 1500 there were 100 million, up to 100 million human beings in what are now the Americas. 100 years later there were 10 million. In this country, there are just a few 100,000 Native Americans. This used to be their whole country. They had cities, they had nations. They had trade. They had everything that there were, it's also estimated there were more people in North America in 1500 than in Europe. Where are they? Now the conditions on the reservations are awful. So if a Native American comes up to me and has an attitude about me being white, I have to respect that attitude. There's a reason for that. But I think it also works both ways. I think that I have to respect that he has an opinion about me for a reason. He has to understand that I am not responsible. That there were others, people who look like me, who were responsible. So we have to understand each other and respect each other. I can respect that people have attitudes, that they have opinions that are valid based on the experience of them or their people or their families, and they have to also understand that I am not responsible for that.
Exactly. A long time ago, Mussolini, he waged war and killed thousands of Ethiopians. He's responsible. But the contemporary Italians, they're not responsible.
That's right.
Yeah, that's Mussolini. So likewise, in the past, there were bad things that happened in America. That should not be, the current generation should not be blamed for those mistakes. So let me conclude that. We have discussed about what's going on about race relation in America, how that affects the country, the future generation, how we should come closer, talk about this issue, and we should not always look for laws or regulations because we have enough. What is required is to come closer and discuss it in public and find ways to solve it together.
That's right.
As you say, rather than talking white people together or black people together, we should come together and talk about this issue.
Right.
So
it's all about respect.
Exactly. On behalf of ISAT and our viewers, thank you very much for coming.
Oh, I'm glad to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dear our viewers, this is my hope that you enjoyed this discussion about race relation in America. You learned something, and I believe that you're going to contribute your share in creating very close relationship between race, ethnic groups, and clans. We have a great opportunity ahead of us. This is the 21st century. We don't have that much difference when it comes to our genetics. The difference is our upbringing and culture. We should outgrow that and work together to face our common challenges. Thank you very much for watching. I look forward to have another opportunity like this one.